I'm here with Nick Jans. Well, not here, via phone. Author. His most recent book, The Giant's Hand, came out in 2016. He's known for A Wolf Called Romeo, The Grizzly Maze, and his column in Alaskan magazine, On the Edge. Thanks for taking some time out of your day, Nick.
You bet.
I want to start with your first book, The Last Light Breaking. That was the one that kind of put you on the map for me. After college, I got a degree in journalism, and I didn't want to cover high school sports. I kind of wanted to get out of the sports writing thing, and I got into the outdoor writing thanks to that first book, and then some outdoor writing by Bill Heavey. And in the preface to that book, you write your first book was rejected, and rightfully so. So how did you continue after your first manuscript was rejected, and how important is critical reflection?
Well, actually, it wasn't my first book wasn't rejected. My first pieces were.
Oh, okay.
My first pieces were, but I was spraying them to the wind. I was thinking up the food chain too. I got rejected by the New Yorker, got a personal note from the Atlantic, stuff like that as well.
But was it different back then? Because I know a lot of times when I get rejection, it's just rejection by there's nothing back. Like sometimes you get an email, but a lot of times that you don't. Was it different back then? Did you get a lot of personal notes, or was it just silence?
No, you usually got some sort of a rejection, but yes, the 90s professional writing scene and today has nothing to compare it to. It's way more difficult these days. Pretty much every magazine, from Rolling Stone to Alaska magazine, has constricted greatly just because of internet competition. People are reading just as much. They just don't do it with physical books that you pick up. So it just changed. It doesn't matter whether you're making a pitch to National Geographic, which, by the way, is super tough because they have the hardest people, to whether you're making a pitch to Alaska Airlines magazine, which was actually one of my first ins. The National Fisherman, which is a commercial fishing tabloid, and airlines magazines. So I got my foot in the door. But anyway, here's how the gig went, to backtrack a little bit, is that I came to Bush, Alaska in 1979, 24 years old, and had a college degree in my back pocket. And I, more than anything, came up to the Arctic just to find out what it was about, and really didn't expect that I would stay, but I did. And it was touch and go, as it is for many people who are traveling that road singly. You find yourself in a native village, and you're immersed in a completely different world. And I was the son of a career diplomat who at one time grew up with servants, and here I was living in a plywood shack that had voles free-flowing in one wall and out the other, and sleeping on caribou skins. I did this first big trip I did, which is in Last Light Breaking, just because I wanted to. I came to Alaska to do that trip, and I wanted to see what else would happen after. And what happened is I got offered a job managing a trading post in Ambler, Alaska, from a Dutch big game guide, and working as a packer for his hunting and guiding outfit. And after I finished my trip, came up to Ambler, and there I was, behind the store counter and a little trading post out in the middle of nowhere. And just kind of invented it from there and found a way to hang on and move from one thing to the other. But I tried to write about that first trip. This is what I was leading up to. I tried to write about that first trip, and I sent it off to Nat Geo. And that was stark silence, because it was totally deserved. It was written in this, hand thrust into into your jacket, Napoleonic heroic mode, and also written extremely earnestly, and in discourse that I'd learned to write in, which was academic writing. The language of literary criticism is not the language of storytelling, no matter how precise and everything else. It's like, you have classical chops, but that doesn't get you Barrel House Blues.
Yeah.
So it was a good foundation, but I was really aware that I just didn't have the right voice, and it didn't matter that I could write well, or that I knew lots of quotes from Shakespeare and Yeats and stuff like that, and could take things apart and analyze them. I didn't know how to write what I wanted to write about. And not only that, but I wasn't even really that interested in writing prose. I was into music in those days, and I wrote poetry just for fun.
That was the first thing you had published, right? Well, one of the first things was in Rolling Stone. Was that one of your first things?
Yeah. No, I sent off 4 different poems to different outfits, and Rolling Stone bought my first poem. Paul McCartney was on the cover, I recall, and there it was, this little short thing, 5-liner, which was sort of Kerouacian inspired. It didn't have anything to do with Alaska. And then I published a couple more in now defunct Alaska semi-arts magazine called Alaska Horizons. It existed in the early 80s briefly. And also got a couple poems published in Gray's Sporting Journal, which was a step up the food chain. And I got paid for every damn one of them. So I thought, well, hey, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a poet. And I studied poetry and everything. That was my main gig, was contemporary poetry and Shakespeare. Not so contemporary, but still poetry in college. So I'd already been up in the Arctic by that time. I was in Noatak, which is a village about 150 miles from Ambler, because there was a teaching job open there, and I realized I couldn't live as a bush bum my whole life, and I didn't want to work for a hunting guide anymore. I didn't want to be a storekeeper anymore. So I pulled out my teaching certificate from my back pocket and got a job there. And so I was knocking away at this poetry, and I applied to the University of Alaska at Fairbanks graduate school and got accepted. And then I thought about it, and I said, now, wait a minute, Fairbanks in the winter, not too much different from the Arctic. It's a much shorter winter, but still is pretty brutal. It's 50, 60 below in a bad year. And I thought I really ought to get outside anyway and just take a break. And so I backed out the door and applied to the University of Washington Graduate School of Creative Writing in Seattle. And back in those days, you could only study creative writing in 2 basic modes, fiction or poetry. End of subject. There was no such thing as what we now call creative nonfiction. And I didn't know that really. And anyway, I thought I was getting accepted to write poetry. And I quit, took a year off from my job and packed up and showed up there. And damned if the department head didn't tell me in my very first meeting with her, you're not going to be doing any poetry here. And I said, why not? And she held up my portfolio like it was a dead skunk and said, this is not for us. And I said, but Rolling Stone? I said, yeah. And I said, well, what the hell am I doing here then? And she said, well, this. And she pulled out a fragment of a short story, of course, fiction, which I had written. She said, we want you to write fiction. We like this. And I said, right on the spot, I was really just about ready to slam the door and head back north. And I thought quickly on my feet, and I said, tell you what, here's my deal. I'll do half fiction, and the other half I want to write nonfiction. And I know you don't offer that, but give me an advisor. I want to work independently with them. And she thought about it and said, done. And so I proceeded to write this just cascade of stuff that came out of me back in those days. Just a whole queue of things that wanted to come out, stories to tell. And I started whacking away at them while at the same time working on short fiction, also very, very Bush, Alaska oriented. And those got a good reception, and I actually won their main prize in writing for fiction, and had an offer to publish them with Stackpole Books in Pennsylvania, mid-sized publisher, and I turned it down.
Really?
Yep. And I've never published one of those short stories.
Huh.
I thought about it, and I chewed on it, and I really didn't. I thought my writing was good enough, but I didn't like them well enough. And there's lots of crappy fiction out there, face it. And
yeah.
I didn't. It's tons of crappy fiction. I didn't want to write crappy fiction. And writing nonfiction seemed much more in my grasp. And because meanwhile, I'd been working on just these true stories, and started sending them out, and got Black River Autumn, which is about 2 Inupiaq old women seining for whitefish at the mouth of the Black River. And I met the editor for National Fisherman at a party, and he said, well, why don't you send a couple things our way? I said, well, it's not exactly commercial fishing. He said, yeah, but we like stuff like this. And boom, I got in. I got paid $400, and I said, wow, this is okay. And excuse me, the damn TV just kicked on. I had it on instead of off. Okay, so I'll go back over that. Anyway, my story, Black River Autumn, got published in National Fisherman. I got $400 for it. I thought, well, hey, I got this all made. And meanwhile, I had been sending out pretty much everything, including the short stories, to see if the Atlantic wanted them, to see if Esquire wanted them, see if Playboy wanted them, for gosh sakes. They published fiction in those days. And everybody, well, for instance, I sent a nonfiction piece to Sports Illustrated, and they said, this isn't really right for us. It's good, but it's not right for us. Have you thought of the Atlantic? And the Atlantic had told me, this isn't really right for us. Have you considered an outdoor magazine? And, I still feel like I'm sort of pigeonholed that way all these years later, because people don't know what to do with my work. Because I'm writing about things like hunting bears with a conscience, and going on 1,000-mile snowmobile trips with an old Eskimo man. People think, oh, it's just adventure outdoor stuff. But I'm trying to write it with all the literary intensity that I can muster every single time I write. And I'm writing with Mark Twain and Shakespeare looking over my shoulder going, is that the best you can do? I always feel that pressure, and it's never good enough. But you have to think like that. It pushes you onward. And 30-something years later, and I don't know how many magazine pieces. Maybe it's 500, maybe it's 700. I really don't know. Published all kinds of places, from a Japanese arts magazine to the German magazine Geo, which is their equivalent of National Geographic, to still airline magazines every now and then. You just put together gigs, working as an independent freelance, whatever you want to call it, right? Yeah. And that's how I broke into Alaska magazine, which was just the same way. I sent them stuff, and I heard nothing from them for like 6 months, a year, and all of a sudden I get this call when I'm at the Ambler School from the principal comes running over and said, a guy from Alaska magazine wants to talk to you. And I ducked out of my classroom for a minute. He said, I'll hold it, and I did, and that was back in the days when they were owned by Yankee magazine, New England, and can't think of the publisher back then, but he just gushed all over the place about how much he loved the stuff, and that was my last Grizzly, which of course became a central piece of Last Light, and traveling like Clarence, about my various snowmobile trips with Clarence Wood. And Running with the Wolves it was. Excuse me. It was Running with the Wolves. Got it. And I wrote a couple those features for them and worked on them and so on. And all of a sudden, it was Ron Dalby was the name of the publisher back then. And then the magazine turned over and became part of Morris Communications of Augusta, Georgia. And there was just a revolving door of people coming and going there. And right now, for example, I think I'm on editor number 15. This is since 1990. And the publishing business is like that. Almost no editor I've worked with, whether at a publishing house, including a big one or a small one or in anything, is where they were. Everybody changes. It's like baseball managers. They move around.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's so much turnover?
I don't know why. I think sometimes people wear out their welcome or they get a better opportunity. But I know a half dozen who got sacked. and in at least 2 cases, they got sacked after acquiring my books.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
I don't know if that was the reason or not, but that quite literally happened with the Grizzly maze. The guy who acquired my book, and it was going great. But all of a sudden, my editor, who wanted the book, was gone, and I was an orphan. And that book got thrown under a big, forgotten bus. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you said earlier about you knew that your writing was good enough when you were starting out. At what point do you know that it's worth selling? Because obviously Alaska inspires a lot of words, and a lot of people want to tell stories, but how do you bridge that this is just a nice story to tell versus I deserve to get paid for this? How did you know it was good enough?
Well, first of all, you have to believe in it, and you have to work on the craft, and you have to become a student of the craft, and I did it by really comparing it. One of the big ahas that I got was in No Attack. That was actually when I really got serious about writing nonfiction. I took a course called Frontier Literature of Alaska, offered by correspondence from UF. And I got this box of books, and I was supposed to read them and write papers about them and all that stuff. And I thought I was going to read all these great books. And I started reading one piece of crap after the other. And I said, well, I can do this. I can do better than this. And that really was the case. I mean, like Edna Ferber's The Ice Palace. And frankly, I know this sounds like heresy, but John McPhee's Coming into the Country. Pretty overrated book, in my opinion. And I like John McPhee, and I like a lot of what he did. But it's really just an essay collection, and very much an outsider's view. And I have a few other objections with it, including something I would say skirts up to plagiarism. But nobody wants to hear that stuff. That's not. But the point is, I thought I could do better.
Mm-hmm.
And
Did you
at least equal that? And so that inspired me. And then I kept on just working on my chops. and that culminated in, being in grad school, and working in the fiction workshops really, really helped me hone my voice. Even though I was writing fiction, which is quite different, I got the idea of writing as Shakespeare did, and really consciously, I was taking apart Shakespeare. So what do all the great lines and passages of Shakespeare have in common? They're 1- and 2-syllable words. They're written in second grade language. It's not complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to this. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. There are 2 2-syllable words, the rest are ones. Out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow. It's the same thing. It keeps on going like that. And I looked at the great lines from Yeats and T.S. Eliot, and pretty much everybody, Mark Twain. Whenever they really had it going, they were using very simple words. And what carried it was the cadence and the combination of sounds and the rhythms. So it was like music.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had that breakthrough, I got it because I'd been taught to write completely the opposite way. Be polysyllabic. Use big, fat vocabulary words. Yank them out of your pocket. And it's not like there aren't places for big words when they're the best word.
Yeah.
A lot of the time they're not. And then it's just the simple stuff. Use simple adjectives. Don't use adverbs unless you really have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nouns and verbs. And I gradually just I didn't know I had a style exactly. I didn't know how to put it, but I kept on getting comments from people is that I can see through your writing. I can see things. I'm there. And it's really, you're not reading. You start just seeing things, and it's because they're not consciously decoding. When we read, and certainly when we write, we put on our serious hats, a lot of the time. And that's one of the problems with writing is we're too earnest and self-conscious instead of being simple. Because when you're sitting around a bar after 4 beers, it's all 1- and 2-syllable words, just like we're using right now.
Yeah.
It's not complicated stuff. And so you want to write in the rhythms of conversation, in this simple, clear style. Don't say azure when you can say blue.
Yeah.
Certainly don't say cerulean. That's a big funk.
That clarity is something I tell my journalism students that if someone doesn't know what you're talking about, it doesn't matter what your vocabulary is.
Right.
You talk about clarity. It's got to make sense first, and just using a thesaurus to try to make yourself sound smart is just going to confuse the reader. If you can't convey your point, it doesn't matter what your words are. So that clarity and cadence, that makes a lot of sense.
Sure. Well, here's a motto which I made up, but it's something I still live by, and I repeat it to myself. Clarity of word equals clarity of thought, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Clarity of word equals clarity of thought, and vice versa, and the two amplify each other. And if you're not clear, and many times, we read textbooks and scientific papers. I read a lot of science because I write about nature a lot, and I want to know the skinny in the background, and I love science, but the writing is often wretched. I know it's constrained by a certain vocabulary and all that, but still, it often is not very clear, and there is no clarity. They don't just say what they mean.
Mm-hmm.
It's this formulaic sort of cake mix, and you can't really deviate from it. I was briefly in a biology program at the University of Maine, and I cracked a joke in an essay about continental drift, and the professor circled it in big red pen and said, "This is not appropriate scientific discourse." And I said, "Well, screw this. I ain't a biologist."
Yeah. Huh.
don't know really when you develop a style until other people start noticing that you have one, I guess, and you start noticing. And I've actually come to understand my style more with time after the fact. And so I can at least duplicate the idea, and I know automatically what not to do. But still there's alchemy involved, and it's, you know, if all it was putting 1 and 2 syllable words together and lots of nouns and verbs and so on, then, you know, Fun with Dick and Jane would be a literary masterpiece.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you think your style comes more from experience or from who you've read or what you've read, or a combination of both?
Tell you the truth, it's all of that. But to me, what was really important to me is that my parents read aloud to me from the time I was 3, 2, 1. My dad was reading, this big poetry anthology. Everything from Longfellow, the Song of Hiawatha, to Shakespeare, and, Rudyard Kipling, which is one of my huge influences and still is. Because he just loved the music of words and made them work. The great gray, green, greasy Limpopo River all set about with fever trees. He's having fun with words, and it's a kid's book, but some of the passages from Just So Stories and The Jungle Book are beautiful. And we don't think of them that way. We just think that he is this quirky Victorian guy.
Yeah.
Tell you the truth, who really sort of set me free in a lot of ways was Richard Brautigan. Trout fishing in America and stuff.
Uh-huh.
Not very well known these days, but back in the 70s, he was a hip writer. He came out with several short books. But first of all, you were allowed to have a sense of humor and crack jokes. It's like Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut is not taken as a serious literary voice in our time very often, but he should be.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that he didn't take himself seriously enough, at least for the literary meisters who opened the gate and shut the gate.
Yeah.
And frankly, I know this sounds sort of full of myself, and I don't want it to sound like that, but I honestly think that I can write with anybody. And you have to have that confidence. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard, and you always have to go back and say, this isn't good enough. I've been spending most of today sitting down, line editing, the same 12,000 words, the first quarter of a short novel I'm writing, that I've been working on for 10 years. Really.
Wow.
But it's going to be, I want it to be my masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
And I want it to be not the crappy collection of short stories that I almost published at age 35. I'm 65 now. And I want this to be my curtain call. I'll write that, and after that I don't have to write anything else. And it's also my pitch at being thought of in a more elevated standard than being the guy who writes a column for Alaskan magazine.
Yeah. That confidence thing is so important. When I was a sports writer, it seemed like there was always, and this is in college, but it seemed ridiculous to me that some of these older journalists who were working for papers would ask these athletes, if they were confident, or, you're playing the number one team in the nation, how do you think you're going to do? Like, what are they supposed to say? Right? Like, they have to have that confidence, otherwise what are they even doing out there? So I always thought that was ridiculous. And I was a college writer, and I thought, that's a ridiculous question. What is he supposed to say? And I'm just trying to get into the freelance thing a little bit here. Like, you have to have that confidence, but you go back and forth, right? You read stuff and you think, this is terrible.
Oh, sure. And the thing is, if you read your writing, here's one thing: is the last thing I write at night, if I read it over and start tearing up and sniffling, all well and good. I know when I'm going to look at it in the morning, it's going to suck.
Yeah.
Because I'll have gone over the top usually. Although less often now. I kind of know when I'm going astray sooner. but I used to waste thousands of words. I wrote an extra 15 or 20,000 polished words, actual chapters from the Grizzly Maze. You know, it was like a third of the book that I threw away. And not only that, it was right to throw it away. The editor told me the book had to be shorter. He said, "Do you want me to choose, or do you want to choose?" And I said, "I'll choose." And I knew it had to go. And I look it over, and it's still, I think it's fine writing. Same thing happened with A Wolf Called Romeo. I wrote about 20,000 polished words, heavily polished, at great, expense of effort and time, that ended up in the crap can. Just like that. And you have to just bounce back and not be affected by that. And I guess the biggest trick is hang around, is read writing that you like and then figure out how and why it works. And it's okay to rip it off a little bit here and there when you're starting off. It's okay to emulate it. It's okay even to use a little fragment of a line. You can call it a literary illusion. But as T.S. Eliot said, if you borrow well enough, it becomes your own. And, certainly, just for example, my last Grizzly, where did that title leak in from? I had no idea until a college professor at UAF, Terry O'Reilly, said, I just love all these references to My Last Duchess, a poem by Robert Browning, I believe it is. And I thought to myself, I said, son of a bitch, he's right. And it was unconscious. And so I had borrowed well enough. Because not only, My Last Duchess starts off with this guy showing this painting to an admiring courtier of his wife who he had killed. And here he is. And so my story of My Last Grizzly starts off with me showing a picture of the bear that I killed and talking about that bear. And I had no idea that was going on until that professor pointed out to me. And see, that's when you know you got something going on, when you have this big gumbo percolating in the background, and you don't know, whether Euripides or the Book of Mark in the Bible or a Hindu poem is going to come out in some disguised or amplified or mutated form that's now your own. So you need to read well. That's one thing, but you also need to hang around people who know reading, and one of the really key things is read your work aloud. There is no substitute for reading your work aloud to an audience that matters to you. Okay, it doesn't have to be an editor. It doesn't have to be a trained writer. Some of my best listeners include my wife, who is a dental hygienist. Never even thought of learning to be a writer, even though she's got a good ear, and a couple of elementary school teachers in Ambler, Lynn and Carol Norstad. They could listen and they go, wait a minute, right there's something funny there. The sound of this. And lots of times I would know it. And reading aloud is when you find out all kinds of things that you cannot possibly discover. Everything from typographical errors to repetitions that you didn't want of the same word or a sentence rhythm. And you find out, well, this sounds funny. And then you realize, well, you have 3 11-word sentences in a row that all start with the. And all that stuff's up in the air. And this is one of the main influences which I was getting to. Because my mom was a classical pianist and an opera singer. And I came out whistling Beethoven, I'm sure. She practiced endlessly, including when she was carrying me. And it's something that I called the music of words. And it's that words have music, and that's how you convey. That's the magic of Shakespeare. Good night, parting is such sweet sorrow that I should say good night till it be morrow. It's this subtle stuff, and it's just the way the words sound. And that would sound even better if I read it slower and with dramatic inflections. I'm not talking about being over the top, but pretty much as if I were speaking, as if I were standing there talking to the love of my life, right?
Yeah.
So music is important too. And if you ask me, what are some of my biggest influences? And I'll tell you right now, the Grateful Dead, the storytelling of Robert Hunter in those songs, Jimi Hendrix, The Doors. Not only that, the music, Bob Dylan. Cinema informs me. I'm more influenced by modern cinema. I'm not talking about like Gone with the Wind, although there are plenty of people who can argue that's a great film. But I'm talking about stuff like the Coen Brothers, Fargo, or the film Fargo, or Sling Blade, or Simple Plan. I mean, those are masterpieces of writing. And it's dialogue and action driven, and that's what I want all my writing to be. Is action driven, visual, and I want it to have a cinematic quality.
There's in the music world, people talk about how some bands or some musicians fall off toward the end of their career. Do you think that's similar with writing, or because you're honing your craft and because you're perfecting or you're mastering your voice, do writers get better while bands fall off, or how do you think that compares?
I don't know. That's a pretty damn good question, because some people do and some people don't, both writers and bands. Although it's pretty tough to argue that the Rolling Stones today are what they were when Satisfaction came out, for the Devil. That's true. That's true, but still, they're pretty good for what they are. I mean, Dylan is still whacking along. He still can throw out a line.
Yeah.
Is he the same guy, who wrote, Mr. Tambourine Man, or who knows? Any of those classics? Probably not. But I think you can totally lose it as a writer. I mean, just decline, not come out with your best stuff. And that's always the challenge, is not to deteriorate, right? And if you do feel like you're deteriorating, it's time to get off the bus. And I just said that exact thing in so many words to a Dutch friend of mine, Corey Donner, who edited both A Wolf Called Romeo and The Giant's Hand, just as a friend. She just wanted to be part of it. And we became friends through that process. And she said, some of your stuff in Giant's Hand is still some of the best stuff there is. I was just looking at it today, some of the best you've written. And I said, well, I hope so, because tell me if I ever am not up to that. And I'm going to quit. So I don't want to go out the door feeling sad.
Yeah. So when you look back at your first book, how do you feel if you reread passages, or how do you feel about the first book there? Is it some of the best stuff? Is that kind of the guide, or have you felt that you've grown a lot since the first book?
Well, I guess I would let's fall back to the Rolling Stones. Maybe I ain't cranking out those 4-chord ditties, but on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with Exile on Main Street either. You grow sometimes, and I can see what I have in that in Last Light is the passion is just boiling out of me. And the craft is very good, because that took me 7 years to write that damn book, because I was learning to write while I was writing it. And I went over and over and over those pieces. 7 years. That's the span of time. And it wasn't easy. I think it's hard to write pretty well, and to set the bar to attempt to write with the best is unbelievably difficult, and it still is for me to this day. I can totally spend all day on a paragraph that I wad up and don't end up using. A few sentences, and it's just crap. It's just not there. and then I'll just get into an understanding of how to get past one point. And I don't write quick drafts. I start at the first word and end at the last, and I don't go forward until the sentence before it is right. And that's how you get that organic completeness. And I always sit down and I start with an editing sweep that starts at the very first word and goes up to where I am. If I'm writing a longer book like A Wolf Called Romeo, I still go back a couple chapters before and read those 2 chapters to get into this, to get into character and to see if I can improve things. And then I'm in where I should be in the space I need to be, and I'm also reminded of what I just said in an organic way. And I don't imagine it's ever going to be different than that for me. That's why this novel's taken so damn long. And it's also because it's scary, because there are so many crappy novels. I mean, what's the great Alaskan novel? What is it? There's none.
Yeah.
There's none. There's none. White Fang and Call of the Wild don't really count because they're actually Yukon, and they're also old timey by now.
Yeah.
They may be classics, but that's what I'm talking about. And why are there? I don't want to use any names, but I know some perfectly good nonfiction writers in Alaska whose novels really aren't so great. And some of them are buddies of mine, and some of them are people I never met. But it's a cautionary tale to me about how hard it is, to write good fiction. And you think it would be easier, but here's the deal: is that I can write 2 chapters, or even 1 chapter, and a very well written prospectus outline, whatever you want to call it, and send it off through my agent to Houghton Mifflin and get an offer. If it's the right book, which A Wolf Called Romeo was. Same thing happened with the Grizzly Maze. I've been in contact with this same agent, and he said, essays, schmessays, people don't want those. And I said, but they're stories. They do want them. She said, I'm just telling you, they don't want them. I'm not. I won't be able to sell them. The they is the editors. So that you can sell essays after you're famous. And I said, oh shucks. Well, and the agent said, when you have a full-length story that you think you need to tell, let's talk. And so I found myself standing where Tim Treadwell and Amy Huguenard had died a few days before, and smelling the death in the air. I was there covering the story for Alaska magazine, because back in those days we did stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he would call me up and said, hey, Tim Treadwell just died. And I said, I'm on it. And literally left like that day. So I lost my train of thought here.
Did you think that Alaska, being that it's so, there's been so much written about it, and it's so almost overwhelming, do you think that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been the great Alaska novel, because it's too big, too much, or?
I don't think so. I don't really think so. It's not that. It's that I don't think there's enough good writers here. I think writing fiction is the grail. And really, when you look at fiction, period, I look at all the books I had to read as an English major at Colby College in Waterville, Maine, pretty snooty little school. And I was reading all this great stuff. I was told it was great. And I was going, God, this kind of sucks. Is this really that good? And of course, anything I read by Shakespeare, I didn't have to ask that question. And when I saw brilliance in anywhere, I was able to pick up on it and say, aha, that's better. It's like Dylan Thomas. I'm talking about the Irish poet Dylan Thomas, or Welsh, excuse me. I don't want to get anyone irritated here. But, he's got like 3 or 4 good poems. And the rest of them are kind of hard to take. But the 3 or 4 good ones are so good that I named The Last Light Breaking after a line from Dylan Thomas. Never until the mankind making, bird, beast, and flower fathering and all humbling darkness tells with silence the last light breaking. And it goes on. And, when you have stuff running around your head and you memorize lines, rhythms and things create themselves and leak out in other ways. Mm-hmm. I would say committing good things to memory. And, of course, you have to have some taste. And taste is a variable thing.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of stuff that just is crap and everyone knows it. And sometimes people who don't know as much would think it's good until they know better, and then they realize it's crap too.
Mm-hmm.
Give or take.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we'd all be famous.
Yeah.
As writers.
Yeah. Do you think
and there is no accident of how you get to the top. It's tough.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the obsession with Alaska, with Discovery Channel, and everything else, all that in the last 20 years, do you think that has invited more crap, or has it kind of improved and upgraded the level of writing about Alaska?
I don't think it's improved it. And, it's really funny. That's one thing I don't get, is all this interest in the Alaska TV shows. You can't meet somebody anywhere. I don't care where you are in the known universe. As soon as they know you're from Alaska, they want to talk about Alaskan bush people or, one of these damn shows, or Life Below Zero. You say, well, I actually know that one guy. As a matter of fact, I was interviewed for a casting call, and actually went to the casting call for a reality show called Tougher in Alaska. It was the brainchild of someone, some writer from Massachusetts and stuff. He knew what he was doing totally. But got us all up there, and we were doing this thing where we were talking to a haul road driver as he was pressure washing his rig, and then we take a turn and help him pressure wash his rig and talk about life driving the haul road. And then he had turned to the camera and say, and everything is tougher in Alaska. I couldn't keep a straight face. I kept this crap up.
Yeah.
I said, oh, man, I ain't doing this crap. And the guy who got the job was some wannabe who'd been in Homer several years and had a burly beard and a bald head and a huge baritone voice, and could scowl and say, everything is tougher in Alaska.
Yeah.
And didn't know how to drive a snow machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the colonization of Alaska. Just like there's been a literary colonization of Alaska. There's been a lot of books, I don't say this in a jealous way, because but Coming Into the Country is written by a New Yorker. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that if you're from someplace else, because Mark Twain made that totally okay, is you can do travel writing.
Yeah.
But it still is some sort of appropriation, and there are a bunch of books out there about Alaska that are well regarded that strike me as being totally like appropriation by people who don't know it that damn well, and or even don't know it at all. Michener writing Alaska. It's the same thing. He's just kind of, well, that's a good story, and I'm going to weave all the history I can in here. And of course, he gets his committee of grad students together, and they all write in the Michener style, and he edits it. Mm-hmm. That's how he wrote his stuff. And Grant Sims, who's now dead, was the editor of Alaska magazine. He was a good guy. He gave me a break, but he wrote this book called Leaving Alaska, and it was just, he'd only been in Alaska for 2 years, and he was leaving Alaska, and he was beating his chest about what the idea was. It got published by a big publisher, but it was as much appropriation as could ever be. Mm-hmm. Trying to piss on a tree that ain't yours.
Yeah. I see that a lot here in Southeast Alaska. You have, it's somewhat different, but it speaks to the same sort of idea that you have these guides who come up and they guide, or they come up and fish, and so they've been coming up here for 20 years or 10 years or whatever, and so you've been up here for 20 summers or 10 summers, so you could, how many Octobers do you have? How many times have you been here in January? And
Right.
so you get this bravado. And I think a lot of the magazine articles now are written by people who come up. They have, their editor buddy sends them to go up in Alaska and try to encapsulate Alaska on this 1 week steelhead fishing trip.
Yeah. Oh, that happens all the time with, Outside Magazine and these things. Yeah, because it's a fun little gig. Of course, those guys want to send themselves.
Yeah.
And especially as magazines are constricting in their budgets, people send themselves and they write their own story and they get a nice little gig out of it. They get the adventure. They get to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep on running into people that they're nice enough, but they paddle a kayak through the Inside Passage maybe, or biked across the Brooks Range or something like that. And it's like they did that so they could write a book,
mm-hmm.
or at least write about it or get a blog going. And I have to say that I came up here to live. Mm-hmm. And if you told me that when I was 24, that I'd be doing what I've done and written all that I've written, I would have been pretty astonished. And I would have been just as astonished if you told me, well, you don't play music anymore. You sold all your guitars. You don't sing anymore. I would have said, you got to be kidding. Because that's what I was playing in bar bands in Kotzebue.
Yeah.
And to think that I would not play music anymore would have completely stunned me. But and I would have been very surprised to think that I would have written by now 13 books and parts of a bunch more. It's funny how time carries you along and just your path leads to where you're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I heard this great line in a song the other day. I can't think of the guy's name, but the ending line of the song is, you travel your whole life to reach the place you're going to die. And that's sort of how I found my way into writing. It's just you keep on walking.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're there, and you look around, you say, okay, well, where am I going and for how much longer? I mean, I've already outlived and outlasted everyone on the masthead at Alaskan Magazine a number of times now. Everybody else gone but me. And when am I going to go? I'm going to go sometime.
Yeah. 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 Huh.
And sooner or later, I'm going to run out of stuff to write about, which is, it's one thing I've thought about a bunch, is that I find myself writing about the same subject, like dealing with bears at close range. And you say, well, how many times can you write about that and keep it different? Well, that's a pretty good challenge. And it's also a challenge which how many times or how many different ways can you write about a snow-covered mountain range in the Arctic at 20 below and come up with a new image? Mm-hmm. Or are you just going to yank out that good one that you know from way back out of your back pocket and throw it in there instead of writing something new? That's the challenge, is not repeating yourself, is not, again, if you're the Rolling Stones, starting off with, coming up with something new. And that's what keeps me going and also makes it more difficult. We were talking about, do things get better? It's more difficult not to repeat yourself.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
There are a couple things that I've sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, you. Very patient. Yeah.
There are a couple things that I never want to write again, because it becomes so cliche. Like if you're writing about fishing, like the reel singing and the sound off the reel, it's like that's there are certain things that you don't need to describe that anymore. Everyone kind of knows. So let's get to some other sort of point rather than try to describe something or try to put new words to something that's so simple. Just move on to something else, and what's the point, rather than trying to explain something that it's just move on.
Yeah, but see, that's the tuned ear of an experienced writer. Is you don't have to say that, so say something else.
Mm-hmm.
Or just get past that. Some things are really, really difficult to write about. Like right now in my novel, I've been stuck for for days and days and even weeks on this one little chapter. But it's a love scene, and man, love scenes are tough. I think of all the love scenes in literature, in written literature that I know, and none of them go as well as I want them to.
Mm-hmm.
It can get too graphic and smutty, or it can be all frou-frou and romancy and you know, supermarket end of the counter book type of thing, or you know, and I want something that's literary and evocative and yet erotic, and you find out, well, that's pretty damn hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what are you going to leave in? What are you going to talk about?
Yeah.
You know? And you, so that's just an example of things, you know, again, like, how do you write about catching a fish without writing about the sound of your reel and the whiz of line? Well, you can, but the thing is, I would say, is just do it as individually as you can and just get on with it to the main point.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and yeah, I mean, writing about catching fish is about just the act of catching the fish is almost never what you really should be writing about when you're writing about fishing.
No, it can't be.
No. You know, you need to find out. You need to think about stuff. You know, and the same thing about Alaska. It's not just the experience, and that's the tough thing about my writing is when I really have done a piece I'm satisfied with, is I don't just talk about the thing. I find meaning,
mm-hmm.
and it's meaning to me. And not only that, I get a little aha, a little light bulb that still goes off. A piece like that in Last Light Breaking, The Circle of the Kill, which is still, you said, bring out one little short piece that you think is as good as anything you've done. It'd be The Circle of the Kill, which I wrote a long
mm-hmm.
time ago, sometime in the early 90s. About just being out in the Brooks Range on a snow machine on a solo trip, coming in from the Noatak and looking up a hill and seeing wolf on a moose kill. And it was, you know, that story took me years to actually get down to figuring out what the meaning was, and then I could write it.
Mm-hmm.
Wolves understand death perfectly. That's the bright, cold wisdom we see in their eyes, the thing that makes us afraid.
Yeah.
You know, it's stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's getting past and there was a giant wolf, and I was scared, and he was majestic, and you know. Geez.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I think that's the trap in outdoor and fishing, hunting, writing, is that it becomes so much about an ego stroke or chest thumping, and it's less about communicating an idea to the reader and like how is this going to resonate with whoever reads it, rather than, you know, prove that you're an alpha male fisherman or that you've conquered a mountain or Alaska. Right.
And that's a tough thing to do. And so then you're writing, really, you need to write metaphorically. You know, because it always means something else. You know, it's like the glib thing, you know, why did you climb the mountain? Well, because it's there. Come on now.
Yeah.
You know, somebody said that once, and it was a good line once, but not the second time.
Yeah.
And so you have to find something new and different to say. And you know, your outer journeys are inner journeys, and they always should lead you to some little light bulb of aha.
Mm-hmm.
That's a key point in pretty much all my writing is not just, I mean, when I'm just writing a column, and I write columns that are just a narrative, and I'm never going to use them again. You know, or maybe I will, because they're good just as a narrative. You know, and then we did this, and then we did that, and so on. If it goes well enough and it's picturesque and exciting enough, it's fine. But that isn't the same as coming to that little epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think we always have to work. It doesn't matter what we're writing about, including sports writing. You know, the best sports writing has those little epiphanies, and I'm not talking about something that you write about. You know, the wombats beating the bullfrogs, you know, 98-4 on their own floor. You know, you have to, that's a formula, and you have to do it. And you're given this much stuff, and nobody wants you to do anything except tell them what happened.
Yeah.
You know, and if you get in one good line, you know, about, you know, how somebody you know, rattled home a 40-footer off balance, and you capture that moment, and that's a bonus.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, writing is a dang hard thing, because I've done a lot of other things in my life, and building a house, when you're done with the framing. There's no more 2x4s to put up. It's self-explanatory. You know when the siding's up. You know when you've run that whole wall of TNG or sheetrock or whatever it is. And in writing, it's never damn done. And I find myself up in front of people, and if I'm reading pretty much anything that I've written, including The Last Light Breaking, which came out in 1993, for gosh sakes, I edit it on the fly, and it's almost always leaving single words, often just single syllable words, out. I do that with A Wolf Called Romeo, too. Never read a passage. I find out what I can do without, and you find out by reading it aloud. When you're really there, when you're really at the point where something is close to finished, it should almost always become shorter, not longer.
What's that scene in the movie, and it's in the book too, River Runs Through It, when, again, half as long. It's just about the writing in thrift. And not.
Now, do you know much about A River Runs Through It?
What do you mean?
Okay, well, that guy workshopped that thing to death. He brought it out in college workshops, as a professor, and brought it out again and again, and had it workshopped and run through and edited endlessly by colleagues, friends, classes, whatever. And if you read the whole collection, and I love A River Runs Through It, don't get me wrong. It really has some just beautiful moments. Yeah. But then you read the other stories, and they kind of suck. And you realize, fall off. And then you realize that this is a one-trick pony, and that was all this guy could do. And when I knew the story, and I knew that story because the guy was teaching, University of Montana, and I had a friend who went to school there, and so the stories were there about it, and about how it got written. And how long
I did like Young Men and Fire. I did like that one too.
I thought it was okay. I read it. Yeah. I read it because I was so fond of A River Runs Through It. And A River Runs Through It I found very, very inspiring at its best spots. Yeah. But a lot of it, if you start looking through it, to me, it's not really quite done, and there's a lot of stuff that really isn't, you see the seams, and you shouldn't see any seams. And then when you read the rest of the stories, you totally understand it. I like Young Men and Fire fine. But I don't think it's something we measure ourselves by and say you need to read this to understand.
Yeah.
It's a good book to read. It's a good entertaining book to read. But there's so much stuff out there and so little time, and I get to read so little that I want to pick my reading very carefully, and I want it to be something that illuminates me and makes me a better, more thoughtful writer, or just reminds me of what I want to aspire to.
Do you think we have an unfair advantage now because we have so much more material that we can read through and critique, and our stockpile is so much bigger than other writers? Do you think we have an unfair advantage?
I don't know. No, I don't think it's an unfair advantage. It's called experience. That's like saying, does Bill Belichick have an unfair advantage?
Yeah.
Just because it's 4th and 2 and he's been here 5,982 times.
Yeah.
And doesn't, it's not an unfair advantage because there's also this. I mean, every now and then somebody shows up, whether it's in music or in writing, who is a bloody genius. They haven't earned it. They just got it. They arrived as Mozarts. Not me. Not me. I mean, I really am proud of having worked and clawed and battled with the craft. And that's what I'm going to continue to do. I know how bad my writing can be. And I never want anyone else to see that writing.
Yeah. Throw it away.
And so I'm motivated by fear. If as much as anything else. Which same thing when I played college football, is I was always being derided by fellow players and even coaches for being pessimistic. Coach would get in my face and say, "You have to stop that guy." And I said, "I don't know if I can." He said, "Well, you have to." And then I remember this big defensive tackle looking down the line at me, and he said, "Damn it, Jens, why you always have to be so negative?" Well, at the end of being so negative, I had 20 solo tackles in the game, and he had 2. Mr. Confident had 2. And I'd sacked the quarterback twice, and yeah, we may have lost, but I made as many tackles as 5 other starters combined. And I was scared the whole time. I was scared of failing because I was across from this monster of a center who was just eating my lunch. And I
think with that, if you don't have, you just end up being naive if you don't have that sort of realistic view of what could actually happen.
Oh, yeah. No, writing, you have to hold yourself to that high standard, and you have to be afraid of failure. I talked about confidence, but being overly confident, of course, leads to many a fall. And there's plenty of people whose confidence, which they call confidence, is really insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to allow yourself to be afraid of failing without it paralyzing you. And that's true as a writer and pretty much anything in life. And if all this sounds like a cosmic battle, it is. Anyone tells me, I always wanted to write a book. And I said, well, first of all, or I always wanted to be a writer. I said, first thing you do is get a good day job.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to make a living as a writer unless you're one of like 0.25% of people. People think I'm successful. Hell, if I didn't have a Tier 1 retirement from the state of Alaska as a teacher and had invested wisely in the stock market and a few other things, I couldn't afford to be a successful writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just doesn't pay that much anymore, and every now and then you get a big check, and you end up being paid the equivalent of $1,000 an hour, and you get paid 18 cents an hour for days.
Yep.
So It's tough, You were talking about, you didn't want to write for some newspaper doing high school sports and making $18,000 as a writer. Well, you should be so lucky. That sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And people look at all the writers who make a big killing, and for every one of those, you have to remember that the average. When the Last Light Breaking came out, here's a good way of looking at it. When the Last Light Breaking came out in 1993, there were approximately 60,000 books published in the U.S. each year. 60,000. That included textbooks and cookbooks. 60,000. Today, it's about 3 million.
Yes.
You can't tell me that the age of the book is over. It just expanded and morphed, and now, anybody can write and self-publish a little book. As a matter of fact, I self-published The Giant's Hand. I went from going with Houghton Mifflin and getting a book that was on the New York Times bestseller list for a while and got translated into eight languages, and still, I'm up, pretty close to 900 reviews on Amazon, which I never thought any book I ever had would ever be. But I went straight from that to self-publishing a collection of essays. And the reason I did was because Houghton Mifflin didn't want my collection of essays. It didn't matter if I had a bestseller.
Oh.
They wanted another book like that. They didn't want something else. They just pretty much said, no, we're not interested. And I checked with a few small presses, and I realized, well, I can do this myself. And the fact is, you can. But you have to, I say that, but you have to have a realistic idea of how you're going to sell your books.
Yeah.
And also of what you can do and how much it costs and everything else. But, I published Giant's Hand. I published 3,000 books in a beautiful top-of-the-line library-bound hardcover. They're printed in Alberta, in Canada, and designed by a guy in Juneau, and or laid out, did the layout, and I did everything else. And my friend Corey edited it. And because I wore all the hats, and then I sold fish off the back of my boat, I could sell it for $22.95 retail and be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And also I had conduits. I had ways to sell it. Every time my column comes out in Alaskan magazine, I sell a few books.
Mm-hmm.
There's traffic on my website. I can tell when the new issue comes out. Brick and mortar bookstores are going downhill, but even more so all the time. I mean, they just drop like flies.
Yeah.
And you guys have a great one down there.
Parnassus,
of course.
Yeah.
And Parnassus is one of the first books I ever did an event at, and yeah, and was treated incredibly kindly.
Yeah.
Remember the old lady there who used to own it? What was her name?
Yeah.
I can't believe I can't think of it. She was like 90 almost.
Oh wow.
And but anyway, that was a different time.
Yeah.
And you really have to think about how can you sell books. I don't sell it on Amazon. I do sell it on the cruise ships when I make my presentations, and all I do is sell 1,000 books, and I was in the black.
Yeah.
Didn't have to sell a whole lot, and if I'd gone with a small press, I would have gotten a $2,000 advance, maybe, and never would have seen another cent.
Gee.
And instead, I made $20,000 and still have 1,200 books in my barn.
Wow, nice.
Few too many.
Yeah.
Too many. There's, and it was because the market changed again right out from under me, because I thought of that model and it was totally realistic. Because Wolf Called Romeo had come out, all of a sudden I was out there, and I'd done another book that was also self-published, The Glacier Wolf, which is out of print, Stories from Southeast Alaska, and it sold out its first two printings. And I ended up selling, 4,000 books. And so I thought, well, sure, 3,000 hardcover is a great place to start. But people stopped buying hardcover books.
Mm-hmm.
Between the time I thought of it, the market was already eroding for hardcover books. And I didn't think about it right. I should have had 500 hardcovers and the rest soft covers. People started paying attention to price points and asking if it was in Kindle. You got to pay attention. And writing is a business. And frankly, I really can't afford to write magazine articles much anymore because I'm still a slow-ass writer. and magazines are paying less, not more, all the time.
Yeah.
If I'm not getting paid $1 a word, I really can barely afford to write that piece. And that may sound snooty. And right now, Alaska Magazine pays about 30 cents a word, I think, for features, but I don't write features for them anymore. I just write my column.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grandfathered in. I know how it goes. But I'm getting paid less by them.
Yeah.
And I'm their guy who's been there.
Yeah. I think a lot of publications are looking for just content, and there's so many people who are willing to write for so little. It's
just like
flooded.
photography. Yeah, it's like photography. The same thing happened in the 1990s. It was a great time. 80s and 90s was a great time to be a professional photographer in Alaska. And nowadays, I have friends of mine who really can't make a living doing it and don't really try very hard to anymore, or they do it more for fun. Mm-hmm. They just don't make the living they used to. Big photo books dried up.
Yeah.
There aren't any big new hardcover Alaska photo books. There used to be.
Yeah.
If they are, they're smaller format and cheaper. Just for example, I used to sell, $1,000 to a couple $1,000 in stock photos. And now there's all these amateur photographers who have this wonderful equipment. Some are retired dentists. They have $100,000 worth of crap and can hire someone to take them up to Kaktovik to shoot polar bears. Or go out in a boat day after day after day after day and take pictures of gulls, porpoises, and humpbacks and stuff. And they're willing to sell their work for a pittance because for them it's not a living, it's their vanity, and actually it's pretty good. Mm-hmm. It's good stuff. Some of it's quite good, and it's certainly good enough to be published because of this amazing gear we have. used to be that if you were going to shoot a 600 millimeter f4 Nikon lens, you needed to be invested.
Yeah, you don't have to know anything now.
No, you don't have to. No, yeah. Anyone can take a good picture. It's a craft that's really pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
And writing, meanwhile, is kind of followed a parallel line where one thing that happened is people forget that around 9/11, the publishing industry changed utterly. And a lot of it never recovered. A lot of magazines and newspapers just cut their staffs. And all of a sudden, there's all these hungry pros looking for a place to publish. And they're still out there. A lot of those jobs never came back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Fairbanks News-Miner and the Anchorage Daily News and the Juneau Empire used to have a staff, and the best people on were really good. They were really good journalists. It wasn't just one or two people, and they did investigative stuff. It was very good reporting. And people forget that, where Alaskans first heard about Chris McCandless was in the News-Miner and in the ADN, and the reporting was spot on and great, into the wild. And, of course, John Krakauer came along and kind of ignored what he didn't want to hear and came up with his own story.
Yeah.
There's a perfect example of a book that is, I consider it to be sort of a co-option or something. And a lot of people's ears are going to burn because people love that book so much. But the fact is that poor guy, I feel so sorry for him, but he didn't do anything and didn't go anyplace. He walked 30 miles to a bus.
Yeah.
How into the wild was that bus?
Yeah. Well, the society that he was trying to throw off, he became more dependent upon because he was mooching off people who were part of it. Sure. And so the fact that he even got as far as he did,
insincerity and stuff, and I was actually buddies with John Krakauer before he was famous, and we had a falling out about his story about Chris McCandless in Outside Magazine because I wrote him a long letter after half a bottle of whiskey and told him he got it wrong. And he came out with a whole book, and then he quoted my letter out of context to make it sound like I was criticizing Chris McCandless.
I remember that.
But it was Krakauer that got it wrong. I was saying he did.
Yeah.
We haven't talked since, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't begrudge him his success at all.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a good guy and a fine writer. But he did get that story wrong, and he's stubborn about it. And I understand why. It's everything. It's his whole legacy.
Yeah.
His whole career came from that. And I don't care who you are. It's really, really tough to ever, by chance and by skill and by whatever else, being in the right place at the right time, hit that big ka-ching where you suddenly jump to the next level where, you're pitching in AA and traveling in the back of a crappy bus that smells like pee, and all of a sudden you get a call from the New York Yankees, and your life has totally changed.
Yeah.
And it's tough to make that leap, and very few people do, and it helps to be good, but it's not necessary to be good.
Yeah.
There's plenty of books that sell well that aren't so hot, but I would like to start off with quality and hope that matters, and let the rest follow.
Mm-hmm.
And all you can do, it's just up to the gods.
Yeah.
As T.S. Eliot said, for us there is only the trying. The rest is not our business. I used to have that posted above my computer.
Well, that's a pretty good send-off. I've kept you on for over an hour and 15 minutes here. So thanks again
sorry for babbling on and on.
No, it's great. I love to listen, and as a aspiring freelance writer with a little bit of credit underneath my belt, it's always great to hear. Then the legitimate Alaskan writer. So I really appreciate you taking time, answering my email first and so quickly, and then taking some time out of your day to be on the podcast.
Here's one thing that I always say. I say it to myself at least once a day. A writer without readers isn't much.
Yeah.
You know, you can write in a vacuum, but you're validated by making contact where other people see something in your writing. And sometimes they see more than you do, like that college professor who spotted the Robert Browning allusions, which I wasn't even aware of. But I knew that poem, and he was right. It leaked out. You know, it's just, you know, and the other thing I think about is that we're all of us, writers, are rolling the same damn rock up the same hill.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly all us Alaska writers are.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've been treated so kindly by so many people. Excuse me, I'm not getting choked up, I'm just coughing. I've been treated kindly by so many people so often and gotten help that I feel obliged to try and pass that along as much as I can.
Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, and congratulations on all your success. I'm looking forward to your work, not only in Alaska Magazine,
you see
but
that novel
that
comes
novel
out,
you're
you
working
might
on.
be 80 when it does, and I might be dead. We'll see. If I finish it, it's going to be damn good. I mean, I promise.
Well, I'm sure it will be.
Yep. Well, we'll find out. And again, for us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks a lot, Nick. I appreciate it.
You bet. Take care, man, and keep in touch.